It is so hard to believe, but the summer is pretty much over now. The kids are back in school. The leaves in your backyard are going to start turning any minute now if they haven't already started turning in your neck of the woods. And that means that we're out of summer reruns on Disclosure, and it's time for a brand new season. My name is Shawn Boonstra, and what a season we are planning to have. In fact, I'm pretty excited by some of the things we're going to do in the upcoming weeks because we've got a brand new feature coming up this year just for men. I know that sounds like a hair dye product, but this is a radio show. On a fairly regular basis, we're going to be doing what we call the bullpen, which is essentially going to be religion for guys. There will be no experts, no ivory tower theologians, just a bunch of regular guys who go to work every day, and they're going to gather here in the studio and weigh in on the weightier matters of life, and it'll be hosted by yours truly. So you're going to want to pay attention to what's coming this year because that actually starts pretty quick in the lineup. In the next few weeks, you should hear the inaugural episode of The Bullpen. But today we've got a really important topic and a guest that is no stranger to you, our Disclosure audience. I've got Jennifer Jill Schwirzer, who is waiting on the phone line from her home base in sunny Orlando to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. We're going to be talking about PTSD. And if you've been paying attention to the news in the last couple of years, you'll know this is a big topic. It's been making the rounds lately because, well, maybe you've heard it. The average number of suicides among veterans right now, at least according to some sources, it does vary based on what you look at, but some are saying it's 22 soldiers a day, 22 vets a day committing suicide. Now, that's a number based on statistics derived from a study of death certificates at the VA, and it's averaged out across a year or two. I'm not sure how many years they averaged it over, but that number should be unacceptable to us. And the fact that so many people are so traumatized that they don't think life is worth living, that should bother us. So that's what we're going to talk about today, PTSD. It's touched people in my circle. It's touched people in my family. It's touched people in your circle. And I'm really glad that Jennifer is waiting on the line. How are you in Orlando today?
I'm awesome. How are you?
Good. Less humid than you are in Orlando. I was there a few weeks ago, and you guys can keep that humidity. Ugh.
It doesn't bother me. I don't mind it at all. And there are no leaves turning brown down here. Nothing.
Well, you do have the habit of staying green in Orlando, but you also have the habit of making my hair go so curly it looks like it's the 1970s again.
You just have to embrace it, Shawn.
I don't like it. I live up at 5,000 feet. There's no humidity. I think we're last January was 70 degrees, no humidity. And the summer gets into the 80s, no humidity. But this year, we've had like thunderstorms every night. And I had a round of hail hit my house that lasted 2 hours.
Oh,
yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, an inch
but,
and a quarter.
On the frizzy hair, I think that we need to do a study about the origins of people rejecting frizzy hair, because how do we know it's not beautiful? Maybe historically it was considered an aspect of beauty, and some kind of nefarious element in society, instigated this anti-frizz movement to sell hair product or something. We just don't know. So
well,
I think maybe you need to do some heart searching on that.
Well, I don't have much going for me, but I still, at my age, have a full head of hair, and you don't understand when it goes frizzy. It goes frizzy. I get the Ronald McDonald going on, or the Marge Simpson. It just piles high on top of my head, goes up 30 feet. And in the 70s, I was rocking it. In the 70s, that was really cool. I had polyester shirt.
You were a white guy with a fro.
Yeah, I was a white guy with a fro, is right. I had a polyester orange shirt that had a ring in the zipper, came all the way up to your chin. I had Buster Brown shoes, and I had corduroy bell bottoms.
What planet are you from, man? This
Same planet you're from. Now, I know you're not old enough to remember the 70s, Jennifer. I know. The 70s are the lost decade, folks. Nobody looks back on those pictures and thinks, wow, I was cool. Nobody.
Oh.
Hey, but as traumatized as I was by my hair, there is a lot more trauma in our world that we need to talk about today. And I guess our topic is PTSD. Help me understand a little bit. What are we talking about? Because people throw the term around, and we're not always convinced they know what it actually is.
So PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. And actually, there's quite a bit of dialogue in the diagnostic community about whether it should be called post-traumatic stress syndrome instead of post-traumatic stress disorder, because it's thought that when people are reacting to a stressful event or a life-threatening event, which is the diagnosis depends on, encountering a very threatening event, that's not a disorder to react that way, to have, kind of nervous system damage as a result of encountering a near-death experience. So it should be called a syndrome because you're adding kind of a shaming to the already difficult situation, if you can follow that logic. But so far it's the PTSD has held, so that's what it's called, post-traumatic stress disorder.
It's one of those things where if the clinicians change the initials now, it's probably too late. I think the ship has sailed. We all hear PTSD, and who's going to shift?
But they try it. I mean, every time they make a revision of the diagnostic manual, they take things out, they add things, they rename things all the time. And then you get to walk around and feel really superior, because when people say hypochondria, you can say, well, it's actually called illness anxiety disorder now.
I think it just should be called WebMD syndrome, because if you feel a tickle in your throat, you go to WebMD and you're convinced that you've got a brain tumor.
Exactly.
Yeah. But
there are more people in PTSD because of WebMD than we realize.
It is really a no laughing matter. I have some friends that laugh about it now because they seem to be, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and they've learned to cope with it. But what is it exactly? How would it differ from, somebody who's just got generalized anxiety?
Okay, so the individual has encountered a life-threatening experience, or they've heard about one and it's caused extreme stress to their nervous system. And as a result, they have the main symptoms of PTSD are flashbacks, nightmares, and extreme triggerability. And I would add to that, some people with PTSD experience dissociation, where they quote unquote go somewhere else.
Oh, really?
So, and that's usually in association with extreme triggerability. So let me break down what those things are. Of course, nightmares is when you dream about the event and wake up in a sweat. We've all experienced that. And then flashbacks are waking, kind of the equivalent, but in an awake state where suddenly you're there again in your mind and you're re-experiencing the trauma. And then extreme triggerability is basically anytime you encounter reminders, sensory reminders, or other kinds of reminders of that event, you go back there again and you feel that nervous system arousal and extreme panic and fear. And then sometimes associated with that, people will dissociate, which is where you kind of go somewhere else in your mind. You're not present anymore. We've, all have, small levels of that when we get upset about something, but this happens on a very wide and pretty drastic scale. So those are the symptoms. And it's thought that what is going on with PTSD is that the memory has not processed thoroughly, and this is the brain's way of trying to get the memory to process.
Well, I've always understood dreaming, and I could be wrong, but the process of dreaming every night seems to be taking your short-term memory and figuring out where to file it. And so it's trying to associate it, which seems to me that's the reason that when I go to bed, I'll see something that happened today, and suddenly it's linked to something that happened in kindergarten. It's trying to find a place to hang that thing. And that's
trying to classify it,
Classify it. And so is this a misfire then of the brain? They saw something, they don't know how to, don't know how to process it, and the brain still hasn't learned to deal with it.
That's the thinking, is that there's something is broken down in the memory processing process. So normal memory processing is basically you remember something and you kind of for a period of time after a distressing event, you re-experience it. So one example that we've pretty much all experienced is like a car accident. You're in a car accident. For a couple of days afterwards, your adrenal glands are pumping out more adrenaline than usual, and you're flashing back on that event, thinking about it, processing it. But eventually, you can sit with your friends and talk, remember that car accident, this and this and this happened, and you can recount it in fact without re-experiencing it. That's normal memory processing.
Well, when I was 16, I drove my father's car off a cliff. It was a
cliff.
Yeah, it was quite a weekend. I was trying to impress the girls in the back seat, and they were underwhelmed by my driving prowess. We managed to go off about a 25, 30-foot ledge, land in the forest, and to this day, I can play the moments, where the car left the road to the moment we hit the forest floor. I can play it in detail in my mind. I can still play it in detail. Because
emotionally significant events we process more heavily than other events, and so we're inclined to like remember the details. But my question to you is, when you recall the details, do you get the same fear sensations or whatever was going on emotionally for you?
No. That
Yeah.
all dissipated in about 3 days. Basically after I got back to school that week, and the kids nicknamed me Crash, and then I had to ride that out for a week. And yeah, it's interesting we're bringing this up. My daughter had a car accident yesterday. Not her fault. She was very clear somebody hit her, and but I was amazed. She's 18, and her level of command of the situation was very impressive. She kind of went into slow motion and dealt with it, and actually calmed down the other woman who had hit her, who was much older, and she kind of went into slow motion and dealt with it, and then seemed pretty good last night. Pretty good.
Yeah, so chip off the old block. I mean, you drove off a cliff and you handled it very well, and she gets hit by another driver and she handles it well.
Yeah.
I mean, at least the handling, like I hope she's not driving off cliffs, but
no,
she's not an emergency.
She's not a young man trying to impress people, and I think there's yeah.
But my point is that you've processed the memory, and I'm sure there was some distress involved, but you've processed the memory, and so you can recall the facts, even in minutia, without re-experiencing it. That's normal memory processing. So the brain kind of takes the emotional charge out of it and files it in the brain to where you can recall the facts without re-experiencing it. But what happens with PTSD is that removal of the emotional charge never takes place.
Okay.
So the person can't really file it because the file's too big, to put in the brain. And think about it, if we never took the emotional charge, or if the brain didn't take the emotional charge out of our memories, we would be constantly experiencing and re-experiencing all of the distressing events of our lives, and we'd be totally overwhelmed. So there's an efficiency and a purpose to what the brain is doing. For some reason, it breaks down in PTSD, so it's thought that the recall, the nightmares, the flashbacks, the trigger ability are the brain's effort to say, look, process this. It hasn't been processed yet.
And didn't we see a lot of this coming out of Vietnam? I know I hear people saying, oh, that's my Agent Orange acting up, but it seems like they'll hear. I know one fella, he can't go to a fireworks show. He just can't go anymore. He was going to take some kids to go hear the fireworks, but he can't go. When the rockets start firing off, he goes to a place that he doesn't want to go to.
Yeah. And this is why there is some wisdom in calling it a syndrome, because do you really want people, when they've been face-to-face with that much carnage and death, do you want them to ever really totally get over it? Wouldn't that sort of belie their humanity, on some level? So there are cases where you want to just keep people away from their triggers. But then there are cases where you want them to be able to process that memory thoroughly so that they aren't so triggerable. And so there's ways we can do that. And
Okay.
I'm assuming you want to hear about that.
Yeah, well, I do want to hear about that, but I hear, you know what, Hareem just turned on the music. Apparently, Hareem doesn't want to hear about it. No, it's time for a break. That's what it is. And so, Jennifer, hang on. I've got Jennifer Jill Schwirzer on the line. We're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, or syndrome, as many people are calling it. We're about to take a break. I want you to hear about this offer from the good people at the Voice of Prophecy. And I'll be back in just a few minutes, and we'll continue discussing post-traumatic stress disorder and maybe some of the things that you ought to recognize if you know someone who's dealing with it, or maybe some of the things that you could cling to if you are dealing with it. We'll be right back.
Disclosure is just one of the programs brought to you by the Voice of Prophecy, like the audio adventure program Discovery Mountain. Discovery Mountain is a weekly Bible-based program for kids of all ages and backgrounds. Your family will enjoy faith-building stories with Jake Donovan, Mr. Simon, and others in this small mountain town. Each summer, campers visit Discovery Mountain, where they sing songs, learn about God, and reenact a Bible story with the help of drama teachers Miss Wendy and Miss Tamra. With 24 full episodes every year and programming every week, your family will have something uplifting to listen to every week. Listen to episodes on demand and watch video features from Director Doug at discoverymountain.com or on your favorite podcast platform. That's discoverymountain.com.
And it is time to wake up from your nap because the break is over. I'm Shawn Boonstra. You're listening to Disclosure, flagship radio show from the Voice of Prophecy Radio Network. My guest today, Jennifer Jill Schwirzer. And before the break, we were talking about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or as we were talking before the break, that some people are shifting to post-traumatic stress syndrome. And Jennifer, you were going to maybe refine the definition a little bit and help us understand what we're dealing with.
So you have really two presentations. One is short-term, what they call acute PTSD, and that's, for a few months duration. And then chronic would be when those symptoms continue for a long period of time. Interestingly enough, PTSD can appear years after the event, and I've actually seen this in a loved one who unfortunately was molested as a child. Yeah, as a child, and then encountered the molester several times after that, but didn't really react to that encounter for years after it happened. And it led the people in a position to do something about it, say, well, if it bothered him so much, why didn't he react right away? Well, that was because they didn't understand the nature of PTSD. It can appear years later with apparently no reaction, and then suddenly a few years,
oh, really?
A major reaction. Yeah.
So you could see something horrible, go through something horrible, and then
right.
As a child, and then it shows up in your 40s.
That's right. Usually it's within a few years, I think, but I know that it can appear later because I've seen it happen, and the research indicates that. But basically, PTSD is like this thing where people encounter trauma, and a lot of times that trauma, in a sense, gives birth to other problems. So I've seen people develop OCD because of a traumatic event, or other forms of anxiety or depression, and then also addictions, because a lot of people try to treat mental illnesses on their own, and they'll take up with substances like alcohol and drugs to try to make those symptoms go away, and then they'll experience all this problem load accumulating, and they'll have an even worse situation in the end. So,
well, I was thinking about that, and my parents and grandparents were the World War II generation. My father was just a boy. My grandparents and their siblings were obviously in the war situation, and we had some family members in the camps, and some of them wouldn't talk. We would, hey, what happened? Because when I'm a little kid, I'm curious. Hey, what happened in the war? And some of them wouldn't talk about what they had seen. They get quiet and tear up. But I didn't see a lot of reliving their trauma or OCD or these kinds of problems show up. But then I met others, growing up. There were kids coming home from Vietnam as I was growing up, and they were really messed up. Like, they would hear a sound, and suddenly they're back on the battlefield for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and someone has to talk them back down from the ledge, so to speak. And so I saw a wide range of people. And, of course, I didn't ever have to go to war. I'm this lucky generation that didn't have to face some of those horrors on the battlefield because I was too young for Vietnam, too old for, the Gulf, that kind of thing. And so what makes the difference there?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that make the difference, but I would say this, first of all, that you don't know what was going on in the private life of the individual that wouldn't talk about it.
True.
And so, but I would guess that, tell me this, did he use alcohol or drugs?
Oh, not a drop. Didn't smoke, didn't drink, kind Christian man.
So the typical scenario of a veteran is they come back with these symptoms of PTSD, and they turn to drugs and alcohol. This is super common. And then as they numb the pain through these substances, they actually circumvent their brain's ability to do the processing it needs to do. And then it reduces their inclination to seek therapy, which may actually help them, recover from the trauma. So there's this whole syndrome that goes on. And then what happens is, because of the addictions and because of the problems that come out of the use of these substances, the problems start to mount in their life, financial problems, relational problems, and so on down the line. So these substances numb the part of the brain that needs to be active in PTSD recovery, and also compromise that person's ability to have relationships, to be consistent in their work life, to think straight even, so they end up by self-medicating, actually making the problem worse.
Here's a question for you, because I honestly don't want to compare myself at all to someone who's really suffering. And I know some who have seen horrible things and are suffering. But just maybe on a micro level, once upon a time I had a house that leaked horribly. So every time it rained, some water would start coming in somewhere. It would. And what I find
Yeah.
interesting about it is that all these years later, decades later, every time it rains, I find myself just a little bit on edge. Just a little bit, even though my house doesn't leak.
Right. It's the training of your nervous system. Now, fortunately, it didn't blossom into full-blown PTSD, but that's the nervous system, and it's there for a purpose. I mean, if we have a bad experience, we get bitten by a dog, we need some kind of traumatic memory, so to speak, to keep us from like trying to pet pit bulls and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like Florida's full of pit bulls. Everybody's got a pit bull. Fortunately, everybody also has a fence. But I mean, these dogs will kill you if there wasn't a fence there, And if you go and try to pet one of them, it's not going to go well. So you need that reminder, and so your nervous system needs to be trained. I think it's just with PTSD, it's just gone out of control.
Okay.
But there are things that people can do to reduce the likelihood of that. As to why some people seem to have, two people might respond in exactly the same way to exactly the same trauma and have two totally different reactions. That has to do with individuality and DNA and a whole bunch of factors that are very difficult to trace. So yeah, there's never a place for like blaming people for their symptoms or making them feel like they're weak or stupid or bad. But for that very reason, many veterans hide their symptoms. So I wonder, you said Opa seemed like a normal guy, but many of the guys that wouldn't talk through and wouldn't admit what they'd been through had secret torment. I'm not saying Opa did, but I'm saying many of them, really had private hell going on.
Sure.
Because they wouldn't talk.
Yeah. And I suspect that's true. But did a generation, it seemed generational to me, I suppose, but maybe there was a generation that buried things better. I don't know.
Are you trying to make a plug for not talking about things?
Yeah, I suppose I am. There's the guy in me. It's like, we don't talk about that. We just, and I'll be honest, that's me. No, I don't want to talk about that. I don't like discussing how I feel about that. I'll go quietly to a room and process what just happened, and I'll come out when I'm feeling somewhat normal again. I don't talk through things. That's true.
And there's a place for that, but what we find in treating PTSD is that that's the exact opposite of what needs to happen.
Sure.
In fact, a lot of times people who can talk to just one person will feel better as a result, and having the right kind of conversation at the right time will enable that person to process the memory. So let me give you a typical scenario. So a person experiences sexual abuse in a family context, and they're traumatized by that sexual abuse. But because the abuser is an important figure in the family system, nobody wants to admit that he's an abuser. Right. And so the victim of the abuser goes to another member of the family system, and that member will not validate that person's trauma or do anything about it, and they end up shutting down that person in one way or another, invalidating what they're saying, and then they cause secondary trauma, and the trauma just sort of festers under the surface and then, bears fruit in the person's adult life. So that's a classic scenario where we have secondary trauma as a result of not being able to talk about a traumatic event.
Well, I think I knew people like that, Jennifer. I knew people like that as a kid who had obviously been abused by someone in the family, but even their own parents denied, no, you've got to be making that up, or they wouldn't deal with it.
And this is one of the reasons that incestuous abuse is much more devastating to an individual than abuse outside of the family, because that system is put in place to protect you. The very system that's put in place to protect you ends up violating you. It's like an autoimmune disease,
Right.
And so that's one reason, but also because there's typically this code of silence. So because people are shut down, they suffer. Whereas if they had been allowed to talk it through and process it, and they partnered with that individual to deal with the situation, they get past the trauma. And so it can make a huge difference if you have even just one person to talk to about it.
Well, how does the talking help? Because earlier you said that that this might be, the thinking is this might be a memory problem. We don't know where to file this. We don't know what to do with it. How does talking, if that is the situation, how does talking through it alleviate that?
So my theory about that, and I got this from the book The Translator, written by this Islamic man who was a translator for journalists during the Darfur crisis in Sudan. And it's a fascinating book. I highly recommend it. And he says that there were whole villages of people that got bombed out, and they were just literally running across the plains like totally fugitives, and they had the task, the translator and all the people, the journalists that were there had the task of trying to help these people cope. And he said that sometimes all those people would need is for one person to listen to them and write down their story, because then that would enable the person to let go of the story. And I agree with that. Human beings have this tremendous drive to archive history. That's why we have all this material on history, why people are always trying to keep track of it. It's just part of human nature to hold on to our history. And if you're the only one that knows it, you've lost your family, you're kind of holding your family in your heart. They don't even exist anymore. You're going to hold on to that history because you want to hold on to them. And you're not going to let go of it, but that memory is going to torment you. But if you share it with someone else and they write it down and you know they're holding it for you, it enables you to back off from that memory and let go of it a little bit. And I've experienced that on a regular basis with clients that have been through traumatic events and never told anyone about it.
Really?
And I sit there with my laptop, and any client of mine will tell you, and I'm not going to give you any of their names, but any client of mine will tell you, maybe they'll tell you, but anyway, that I sit there and type on my computer while I'm talking to them, because I want to keep track of what they're saying. It's important. It matters, you know.
Right.
And they get a sense that what they went through matters. And I really think that reflects the heart of God, because He keeps all our tears in a bottle. He doesn't say just forget about the past. He
Psalm
says,
56.
I've written down.
Right.
That's right. I've written down every detail. I know what you've been through, and it matters to me. And so we can really be the hands and feet of God and the eyes and the heart of God to people when we listen to their stories.
Well, that's fascinating. I really do believe that. You know, the Bible says that there are books in heaven, and it speaks about books, and whether they're scrolls or books or whatever the mechanism genuinely is. You know, it's not for God's memory's sake that they're keeping the records. It can't be, because we've got an omniscient God. But all of heaven is paying attention to what's going on here, and God does not miss the trauma that happens in our life. He sees it.
Right.
And that does bring me some comfort. I think what you've mentioned is interesting. You know, I'm not an expert on any of this stuff, but I pay attention to brain mechanisms because they fascinate me. And when I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I have a little panic, it's like, oh no, did you remember? What about this? Especially when I'm overworked and tired. Keeping a notepad on the night table.
Yes, I do the same.
Right. And all I have to do is get up for 5 minutes, write it down, and when I see it
Well, you don't even
written,
have to get up. You could just grab the pen and scribble it out on the paper without even turning the light on. At least I do.
then I can go back to sleep. It's amazing when I know it's archived somewhere.
That's right.
I can go to sleep.
That's right.
Because I think what's keeping me awake is I don't want to forget. I don't want to forget this, because what if my whole week will be wrecked if I forget to write this book or do that? So I hear the music again. Have I blabbed that much, Harim? Have I blabbed so long that we're like at the halftime show? All right, we are going to have to take a break, Jennifer, but I want to pick this up again in just a few minutes. We do have some important information from the Voice of Prophecy coming up in this break. You're going to want to run and get your pad of paper and a pen and write this down so that you don't lay awake all night wondering what you missed from the Voice of Prophecy. Pay attention to this. We'll be right back to talk a little bit more about post-traumatic stress disorder, or post-traumatic stress syndrome. We'll be right back after these words.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions, like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website, or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like, Does My Life Really Matter to God? And A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter most to you in each of the 26 Discover Bible Guides. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
And if this was a baseball game, we'd be rounding second base right now. We're headed to the back half of this episode of Disclosure. We're talking about PTSD. My guest today is Jennifer Jill Schwirzer, a regular on the show who does me a world of good. I feel like, Jennifer, I get a little free counseling when we do a topic together. You notice I always work in a little bit.
Of your own stuff.
My own problem. I don't have PTSD. At least I don't think so.
I don't feel like I've gotten anywhere with you yet, though. I think you're
no,
just as functional as you were when we started.
Well, you do have your own show, The Multitude of Counselors, and I know I was on there, and you guys were going to help me with my insomnia.
How has it improved?
No. No, you're wonderful at what you do.
I mean?
No, everybody needs to get in contact with your organization and get help. I found it insightful. A lot of it was insightful. But we only on that show had 30 minutes to work through a crisis that's been plaguing me for 50 years, so.
You need a lot more treatment than 30 minutes, man.
Yeah, I really do.
But it was like, if you think about it, it was like, 5 counselors, 30 minutes. So it really would have been 150 minutes. So it would have been like two full sets.
Is that the way you bill? Is that the way you bill?
Exactly. Didn't you get our bill?
No. But yes, the check is in the mail. The check is in the mail.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you're going to need a lot more treatment than that.
Oh, I know.
It's just, you spend all these years getting into it. You're not going to get out of it in one session.
I'm an amusement park of issues. I'm an amusement park of issues. I think we all are, though, to some degree. Who gets through unscathed in a sinful world? Who gets through unscathed?
That's true.
And Hareem's not going to get through unscathed because in the break he messed up the timer. And is your resume still current, Hareem? Hareem, is your resume still current? As you still have that cardboard box by your desk? Not saying you need it for sure.
Oh.
No. Now he's going to need PTSD. See, I'm just trying to create some PTSD here.
You are. So you're just spreading it around because you haven't resolved your own. So,
And I'm smiling and laughing, but for those who are suffering, it probably really is not a laughing matter at all. As a matter of fact, those I know, it isn't. I know some that are laughing now, but really weren't laughing. I've seen devastating weight loss in people. I've seen tremors. I've seen all kinds of things. And you mentioned OCD that grows out of this.
Yeah.
Now, I have a little of that, too. I should work that in. No. Well, my OCD is this.
That.
Oh, you do? Yeah. I can't listen to music
that.
that's out of sync with the windshield wipers. I can't do it.
Oh, man, I know. I feel the same way. Or if you're walking down the road and someone has their music playing and you're not walking in sync with it, that freaks me out a little bit.
No, that's right.
But then I feel like I'm dancing, and I'm an Adventist. I'm not supposed to dance. It's really bad.
Yeah. Hey, where should we pick up? I've got this story in front of me. I'll throw this out here.
I thought we were going. All right, go ahead.
Go. Tell me where we were going.
I thought we were already taping.
Yeah, we are. We're on the air. So,
we are. Okay.
Yeah, no, the break is over. I always like to fire Hareem on the air. Because it's more, I'm really trying for some PTSD, and he's laughing, and so apparently it's not working. No, we are on the air. Here's a story that I want to throw past you. There's this guy. This story ran in the Canadian press, which I still read these days, August the 9th. Here's this guy, Christopher Garnier, 30 years old, convicted in December of second-degree murder. I don't know why he only got second degree. He strangled an off-duty police officer, threw her body in a dumpster, and when it came time for sentencing, his lawyer was pleading for clemency or leniency in the sentencing because of the, quote, PTSD that the perpetrator was suffering because of the heinous act he had witnessed. Now, I want to throw that past your desk. Can you use PTSD as an excuse for aberrant behavior?
Well, I have to say it's very, not that I know by firsthand experience, but it must be very traumatic to murder someone,
Yeah, but, he didn't say he was murdering because of PTSD. He's arguing I've got a quote mental illness because I committed the murder.
Now I have PTSD because I murdered someone, so don't put me in a jail cell where it might make it worse.
Yeah.
Is that what he's saying?
Yeah, and I have a lot of trouble working up sympathy for that. I don't know that the story actually says. I've got it right here on my desk. He's supposed to get between 10 and 25 years because they went second degree. They're arguing he's kind and caring, but now he has PTSD. And I had a lot of trouble evincing sympathy, bringing up a lot of empathy for this guy. But someone who, I know a prison guard who saw somebody disemboweled on duty and really suffered. And there are others in that line of work I know that just kind of quietly killed themselves because of what they had seen. That I do have sympathy for. They didn't cause this grotesque incident.
Right.
But I found this one
Right.
curious as a counselor and someone who specializes in this. Does that ring your bell for sympathy? A guy who says, "Now I
Yeah.
have PTSD."
Well, there's a lot of attempts to evoke sympathy these days because PTSD is becoming very commonly known, and trauma is talked about a lot in even just generic circles, not just psychology circles. And in addition to that, there's another kind of PTSD that's gotten a lot of press lately called CPTSD, which stands for chronic PTSD.
Right.
And
Okay.
well, to diagnose PTSD, the person has to have a pretty life-shattering event. But CPTSD is different. It doesn't have to be a life-shattering singular event. It needs to be a consistent stream of events that cause the same or similar effect. So it's kind of like Chinese water torture, or if I were to tap your arm, it wouldn't hurt, but if I tapped it for 3 days in a row,
Right.
it would start to really hurt. So that's the equivalent of PTSD, CPTSD.
Okay.
And so CPTSD is called is chronic PTSD, and it just like PTSD, it has been associated with a number of illnesses and autoimmune disease, high blood pressure, heart disease, liver disease, and it comes more from the home environment, really. If you kind of drill down into it, it's people that were raised in a highly, not just dysfunctional, but really unhealthy home environment where there's addiction, abuse, or other kinds of problems that are just chronic. So some research has come out of that called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Research. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't.
So the Adverse ACE study was actually inspired by a man that was running a weight loss clinic, and he noticed that people would lose weight during this program he had, but then they would relapse and they would gain the weight back. And he studied into it, and he found that people that would gain the weight back typically had childhood trauma.
Really?
And much of it was sexual abuse, actually. So out of that came these adverse childhood experiences studies, and what they found is that if people have these ACEs, then they end up with disrupted neurodevelopment. They end up with, out of that disrupted neurodevelopment comes social, emotional, and cognitive impairments. And then out of those impairments come adoption of high-risk health behaviors, like, eating unhealthy and drugs and drinking and smoking and this type of thing. And then out of that comes disease, disability, and social problems. And out of that comes early death. And so
Wow.
they trace this, where people have these really unhealthy childhood environments, and it sets them on a path toward early death, of all things.
Wow.
And that's
wow.
from, kind of baseline, constant, just very prevalent, sort of enduring trauma of us on a smaller scale than, encountering death in a war context. But it has the same effect on the nervous system and really prevents people from developing a healthy nervous system. So
what I'm thinking about right now is the fact that when Jesus addressed the issue of murder, he moved the goalpost way in closer than just taking a life. He called hating somebody equivalent to murder. And so obviously there really is a life-altering effect when we abuse somebody.
Well, the bottom line, we are created in God's image to love and be loved. We're created for love. And when you live in an environment, your whole structure of your soul, so to speak, that God built into you is for you to grow up in love and nurture, and instead you grow up in abuse and constant turmoil. That is going to war against your design, and it's going to cause dysfunction as a result of it, and people are going to get sick as a result of that.
Wow.
And you're right that the spiritual really does, and the emotional really does matter, even though it's more difficult to quantify. One of the things I run into that is probably the most chronic source of what I would call ACEs is a highly critical home, a home in which the child is never affirmed, never validated, never encouraged, and constantly criticized. That can be really, really devastating on a person's psyche. And I've just been able to trace over and over again on an anecdotal level that kind of home environment to present anxiety and mood disorders. It's just super common.
Wow.
And it's really hard to undo all that damage, when people are, and it's just a cautionary tale to parents. Your ratio of criticism to affirmation of your kid should be like 20-1. Like, you should be building them up as often as you can. Of course, you have to criticize them sometimes. That's part of your job, is to correct and guide and grow them in the right direction.
But would
But if you
critique be a better word than criticize? Maybe criticize
Yes,
to me,
exactly.
when I hear that word, I think we're criticizing the person holistically. Like the implication is there's something wrong with you as a person. A critique is there's a
Yes.
better way to do that.
And then there's all this research on shame motivation versus guilt motivation. Someone who's able to step away from I am bad to what I did was bad. It has guilt responses to wrongdoing. And that person's just much healthier psychologically and spiritually and emotionally than the person who's shame-based. But you're
You've
right,
given
that
me
critical environment.
you've given me an idea for another show. Just we got to do a program on shame.
On guilt and
Because no,
shame,
I do.
yeah.
I have this I have this hunch that we maybe have been so averse to shame that we have none anymore, and I'm not
I
sure
agree
that's
with
good
you.
either.
And I'm cautious about shaming shame. You know, I don't think we should ever expect to.
Shaming shame.
Seriously.
That'll be the name of the show that we do. Well,
Exactly.
but like there's
But I
no
don't think-
shame in behaving badly
Having-
anymore.
Well, then if you tell people they should have no shame, then when they have shame, they develop secondary disturbance where they're disturbed and then disturbed about being disturbed.
Oh wow.
And then they feel like, and in a religious context, they'll be like, well, everybody else is so shame-free and I still feel ashamed. I must not be a good Christian. And then they'll start second-guessing their religion. So I agree with you that I don't think we should ever, in sinful flesh here on earth, expect to eradicate shame completely. But then there is a threshold where it becomes so dominant in our experience that it really does become unhealthy.
Well, I guess that opens up a whole can of worms, and I know that you know
Yeah.
we've got less than 2 minutes to the break yet again. But the issue of guilt and PTSD, there's got to be a role
Right.
there.
Well, I
even
love what
even
you
if it's not
say.
my fault, is
Oh,
it
yeah.
survivor's guilt or I didn't do enough guilt?
Definitely. Well, I mean, don't you think, like in a war context, if a person is in a battle, of course they're going to shoot, and then watching people die, I mean, that would be, for me, would be overwhelming. I have nightmares about hitting someone with a car and ending the life of a child that runs across the road or something like that. I used to lay in bed at night as a parent and wonder, you know, did I buckle their child seatbelt? You know, I used to think,
Right.
what if something happened to one of my kids? Because of my neglect, I could never forgive myself. So those are very, very traumatizing experiences. And
Well,
would
and
be
of course,
for me.
as a mother, you want to make sure that they have clean underwear in case they go to the hospital. No, I don't know why moms are so obsessed by that. Are you wearing clean underwear? What if you go to the hospital? Well, that's probably the shame of the mother.
Yeah, exactly. But you're so right, Shawn, that critical environment makes a person very shame-based, and that can lead to a lot of problems down the road. Very,
Well,
very true.
We have one more segment to go, and I hear them cranking up the music on us again, but I'd like to talk now a little bit about the path out for folks. Maybe
Yep.
at what point do I know that I need help?
Yes.
What advantage does the Christian faith bring to this situation? Some of those
Yes.
questions. So,
I'm ready.
okay, good. Let's take the break. You hear the music. That means it's time to grab that pen and paper again so that you can jot down all these wonderful details because the Voice of Prophecy has an awful lot to offer you. So write this stuff down, and I'll be right back after this break.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions? Like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers that you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like Does My Life Really Matter to God? And A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter the most to you. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
And that last break went flawlessly, so the good news is we had a job interview during the break. Hareem's been rehired because he's actually pretty good at what he does. He's smiling again, and the thing is, though, like all of his accrued vacation is gone now, so he has to start from scratch today.
Oh, that's so unfair.
No, we fire everybody every month here so they never get any vacation.
I think that would qualify as workplace abuse,
Yeah,
Shawn.
probably. We don't. Harim is a good guy. Joel is pointing at me, so he's fired next. He can just pack his bags right now. Joel, don't point and laugh at me. Okay, let's talk. Let's finish up on PTSD. Not that we can
Yes.
ever finish in an hour, but I really want to talk about hope. I want to talk about
Yeah.
what's the way out. When do I
Yeah.
realize that I should probably talk to somebody? At what point do
Yeah.
I know that I've got a problem?
Okay. So what you want to do is pay attention to if the symptoms are causing disruption in your life. Like, can you function? Is it affecting your functionality? If you can't work, if you can't form relationships, if this thing is derailing you, then get help, because the path out is actually not that complicated and it's pretty effective.
Okay.
So let me give you an idea of what we do. Number one, we just let people tell their story, because as I mentioned before, sometimes that's all people need, is to be able to share their story with someone in the context of a warm, what we call therapeutic alliance, where there's a trust bond with a good counselor. That person shares, they empathize, that person feels validated, and a lot of times that's all they need. But there's other things we can do. One of them was discovered by a lady named Frances Shapiro.
Okay.
She was in a park thinking about a traumatic event, and she was looking at nature and moving her eyes back and forth across the field of vision. And she noticed that the traumatic event didn't affect her as much as it normally did.
Really?
So she developed a method out of that called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR, where the person does something, and there's different ways of doing this, but they bilateralize the brain on purpose in the office. So they either use lights or probes,
Okay.
and they get both hemispheres of the brain to be syncing up together and working together. In my thinking, the best way to do that is walking, because walking bilateralizes the brain. So,
Oh, really?
and she discovered it by walking. So anyway, they do that sort of artificially in an office, and then the person talks through the event, the traumatic event, in the context of that bilateralized state, and we find that enhances their ability to process the memory. What I do is I just take people on walks, and I say, let's talk through this while we're walking. Look at the birds over there. Look at the beautiful sunlight on the water, and let's talk through this thing. And of course, we're in private. And just that natural environment, the oxygenation of the brain, moving their eyes back and forth across the field of vision, and walking seems to really help them be able to process better. So that's one thing we do. We can also do deep relaxation, deep breathing, and prayer, and then reviewing the material in the context of that relaxed state. Sometimes that'll help reroute the brain to where there isn't such an overfiring of the synapses in the context of that memory, so you can sort of rewire the memory to where it evokes calm instead of panic. Sometimes that works. I usually try a little of everything if I've got a tough case. And so those are some of the treatments, and they're really, really effective. Now, I want to share my own journey regarding PTSD as a clinician.
Yeah, okay.
Not just, I've experienced some traumatic events. I don't know that I'm diagnosed with PTSD, but I know I got my triggers, and everybody does. But what I noticed, and this is me speaking as a clinician and kind of my journey, was that because trauma has become such a commonplace item of discussion, and because people are so versed, and I'm really triggered by that type of language, there's almost this sense that if you've been triggered, you're damaged forever, or if you've been traumatized, you're damaged forever.
Right.
And I would look at my Bible and I would think, no, wait a minute, that's not what the Bible teaches. I would look at things like 2 Corinthians 4:8-9, which, it says, we are hard pressed on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted. This is people under persecution that experience, beatings and even death.
Right.
But not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. So in other words, that trauma, in the most important sense, it's not saying it didn't affect their nervous system, but in the most important sense, it did not destroy them. And I started to think, and I read like Joel 2:25, I will make up to you for the years that the swarming locust is eaten, the creeping locust, the crippling. You see this person going, well, what about the creeping locust? Well, the crippling locust, God, that one's the terrible one. Well, even that one. The gnawing locust, well, I can even restore what the gnawing locust is eaten. God, it keeps, kind of addressing their defenses. And he says that he'll restore it to us. So I started thinking, I bet there's research out there that shows that depending on how people process trauma, it can go good or it can go bad.
Right, okay.
And so what I discovered is there's a whole field of research called post-traumatic stress growth, or
Oh.
post-traumatic growth, rather.
Right.
There's a whole field. Okay, so we went through Germany, and they had certain towns that they had picked out because they were the most bombed-out towns in Germany during World War II. And they thought that there would be higher levels of what they call German angst, which is this tendency apparently German people have to be negative and pessimistic. So they went through those towns and they found the exact opposite, that the most devastated towns were the ones where people were the most positive. And so that hinted at maybe trauma can actually be, it can be the basis of real positivity in a person's life. And think about it, Shawn. What events in your life have brought you to a place of prioritizing what really matters?
Oh, it's
Has
always
it been the positive?
yeah, it's always been the trauma. It's always been I just lost everything, or I just lost that whole semester, or whatever. It's always those things that make me focus and reprioritize and figure out what really matters.
And isn't that a positive outgrowth of a traumatic event?
Sure it is. Yeah.
So I looked through the research about post-traumatic growth predictors, things that are the things that determine whether this is going to go bad in the person's life or whether something good is going to come out of it. And the predictors are, you ready for this?
Yeah.
Spirituality,
Wow.
no surprise there, but a certain kind of spirituality where there's a focus on the positive in the spirituality. So people that are obsessed with the devil, they're believers. They're obsessed with the power of darkness. It's probably not going to go as well.
No.
And then, and then another factor is social support pre and post trauma. So where do you find social support? I mean, I know the church is dysfunctional and churches can be toxic, but the best place I know to find social support through the hardships of life, if you don't have a great family and a lot of family support, is the church.
Yeah.
Because the church is a family of God, at least theoretically. Not saying every church does that, but even in our broken, kind of messed up state, we can still provide a good deal of social support. And then a third factor, hang on.
Yep. Have I lost you?
I had a call.
Ah.
A third.
They should know
factor-
better than that. You're on the air with me.
Well, I'm actually supposed to have a session right now.
Oh, okay.
But a third factor is what's called acceptance coping, and I'm fascinated by that one. It's where you're able to accept what happens, basically. And what better to equip you for accepting a terribly unfortunate event in your temporal life than a hope of heaven, and the belief as well that those things can actually be used to develop your character. I don't know a better way of helping people accept, hey, it happened.
Yeah.
Because there's this silver lining on these negative events. And then finally, emotional disclosure is another factor, another predictor of post-traumatic growth.
Meaning,
And
is that where I have to share my feelings?
Exactly. But
Yeah.
your show is called Disclosure, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's time. This is a sign from God, Shawn.
Yeah, I'm going to have to
It's a
do
sign
it.
from God.
I'm going to have to do it. Actually, disclosure is also a synonym for revelation, and we do a lot of Bible prophecy themes here. So.
I see. Oh, nice duck.
Yeah, I ducked it. I don't have to
You
share
got
my
out of that.
feelings. I don't have to share my feelings. But, it's interesting. For guys, anger's fine, just not wounded or hurt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like you're already partway there. You know how to share your feelings. You get mad. So let's just go a little deeper. Just
Yeah.
carry it through logically to the logical conclusion. If you can share anger, then you can share sadness, and it's going to be okay, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know.
Yeah.
It's just, sometimes in a church environment, people don't want to do that because they're not sure how far it's going to travel, because church people are not always the best at keeping confidence. So,
And that's so true. And we need to create, first of all, a culture of sensitivity and safety in church, but also give people wisdom about who to share with, and don't share with everyone. I wouldn't get up at a church service and share my most intimate secrets. I know you wouldn't.
No.
That's just not
Testimony
practical.
time. Testimony time is asking for problems. And that's sad, but it's true.
Yeah.
Look-
Someday we'll be that safe, but right now we're not.
No.
But we can still find smaller
Somebody.
units, small groups. We can find therapy groups. We can find therapists. They have to keep things private. You can find good friends that you can trust.
Yeah. Listen, let me ask this question. So there are people in my circle that obviously struggle with PTSD. What's helpful? What's not? What should I be thinking about as someone who might be in that support circle?
Well, let me take a thread off of what you just said, kind of by saying the church isn't safe for emotional disclosure. You indicated that emotional disclosure would be a risky thing.
It is.
But I'm not, well, it can be, but I'm not sure it's as risky as you think it is. And I'm not sure you've tested that theory thoroughly. I think you could probably do more to like test the
Right.
theory that emotional disclosure is dangerous, because you probably haven't done a lot of that in your life. So I would say that we could probably push the envelope a little farther than we do. And I'll tell you an event in my life. I was experiencing some pretty significant depression due to a medical problem. And my pastor came, who's a good friend of mine, came, and he said he noticed that my stress level was very high and he was worried about me. And he said, why don't you share with the church what is going on in your life so you don't feel so alone? And I said, if I get up and start talking, I'll turn into a demoniac, meaning I would lose all control and just start blubbering or whatever. You
Right.
know what he said to me, which was probably the most kind and helpful thing anyone has ever said to me? He said, then turn into a demoniac.
Wow.
Meaning he was like, I don't care if your trials and difficulties that you're having disrupt my sweet little church, the peace of my church on Sabbath morning. I don't care. I'm willing to risk that for you. Go ahead and talk. And that meant a lot to me. And I think sometimes we can push the envelope of sharing more broadly farther than we do, because
Right.
we're so worried that people are, but what can they do? You just admitted that you were traumatized by something. Why is that? Why does that incriminate
Right.
you in any way, shape, or form?
I think for guys, maybe I need to bring this to
Yeah.
the bullpen shows that are coming up. I think for guys,
Yeah.
for me, it's not that, oh, now they know too much about me. Do you know what it is? I don't want their advice. I just don't want their advice. I don't.
And
It's
you
like,
know they're going to.
yeah.
You get that anyway, Shawn. You
Yeah.
have all these health problems, and people send you texts and emails and messages
Yeah.
telling you what herbs to take.
Yeah, I know.
You've lived through it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Listen, we've got less than 2 minutes left, and so in 1 hour we're not going to really unpack this. But if people want to find out more, what's your website?
They should go to abidecounseling.com. Abide in the vine, counseling.com.
Right.
And we can start in the process of trying to help them. Now, if they're having we do distance counseling at Abide Counseling, so we counsel over the phone or Skype.
Right.
And we do coaching and different forms of that. And if they are having a really serious symptom, they should be seeing someone locally. Like if they're having dissociative symptoms or suicidality or anything like that, they should see someone locally,
Right.
because we're a distance program. But if they wish, they can start with us, and we'd be glad to help them to find the right help. So they can start there, abidecounseling.com.
Fantastic.
And there's a lot of resources connected with Abide Counseling that I can point them to.
Oh, fantastic. I really do appreciate it. And I know we live in a broken world, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better. Christians are waiting for Jesus to come. We're waiting for God to hit the reset button that would eliminate a lot of the things that cause these problems. But in the meantime, there's a couple of things to think about it that I've gathered. One, you're not alone. If this is happening to you, it's happened to others, and there are people who are willing to listen and to help. Secondly, there are people who need you. If you're not struggling with this, there might be someone in your circle who is, and you heard today that maybe one of the best things you could do is just zip it and sit and listen and acknowledge their pain and pray with them. I heard you say prayer, Jennifer, and that's big in my life. I know there's actually someone on the other end listening. Well, that's it. We're out of time. You go back to your humid Orlando, and we're sorry we held you from your client. Apologize from us at Disclosure, and thanks for coming on. We'll talk to you again soon. And to those of you listening out in Radio Land, I'm Shawn Boonstra. You've been listening to Disclosure.